Someone tells you that you did something well. Maybe it's a compliment about your work. Maybe it's a genuine observation about who you are. And the moment they finish the sentence, something happens inside you, a kind of recoil. Not embarrassment exactly, not quite discomfort. Something faster than both. A reflex. Before they've even stopped speaking, you're already constructing the deflection. Oh, it was nothing. You're being too generous. I had a lot of help. The words arrive before you've decided to say them. 'Cause you didn't decide. It just happened. And here's what no one talks about. It doesn't feel like self-doubt in that moment. It feels like accuracy. It feels like you're correcting a mistake they've made. The mistake of overestimating you. The compliment lands in your mind and immediately collides with everything you know about yourself. All the uncertainty, all the behind-the-scenes footage they didn't see, and it just doesn't fit. So you fix it, politely, reflexively. Every time. The label people have given this is modesty. Sometimes humility. Sometimes when they're frustrated with you, low self-esteem. And you've worn those labels with varying degrees of comfort, not quite believing any of them apply, not quite sure what actually does. Here's what this video is going to argue. None of those labels are accurate. What you're doing when you deflect a compliment is not a character flaw, and it is not a virtue. It is a signal. And the thing it's signaling has nothing to do with how you see yourself. It has everything to do with something far more specific. A gap that has been quietly running your life since before you had the words to describe it. We're going to name that gap. Think about the first time it became a problem. Not the first time you did it. You've been doing it as long as you can remember. But the first time someone made it visible. Maybe a teacher said, "Why can't you just say thank you?" Maybe a parent told you to stop fishing for compliments, confusing your deflection for its opposite. Maybe a friend got frustrated because every time they praised you, you argued with them, and suddenly something that felt like just how you were became something you were supposed to change. So you tried, you practiced. You rehearsed the clean, uncomplicated thank you in your head before social situations. And sometimes it worked. You got the words out, you smiled. The moment passed, but internally, nothing changed. The collision still happened. The dissonance was still there. You'd said the right thing and felt like a liar for it. This is the part that has followed you. Not the behavior itself, but the experience of trying to correct it and failing to make the correction feel true. Because what people were asking you to do was not change your words. They were asking you to change your internal experience without giving you any reason to believe the new experience was more accurate than the old one. Here is the interior monologue, the one you actually run in real time when a compliment arrives. They don't know what they're looking at. They saw the result, not the process. They didn't see how many times I second-guessed this, how much of it was luck, how much of it was just not failing badly enough. If they knew what was going on behind this, they would not be saying that. And so I can't just accept it. Accepting it would mean agreeing with a version of me that isn't real. That is the monologue. And notice what it's doing. It's not self-hatred. It's not insecurity in the simple sense. It's an argument, a precise, internally consistent argument about the gap between the signal someone else is reading and the reality you know. Here is what this has cost you across years and relationships. To have been the person who couldn't receive. In friendships where giving and receiving are supposed to move in both directions, you've been the one-way valve. Generous, present, attentive to others' worth, but sealed when the current reversed. People close to you have felt the frustration of trying to offer you something real and having it handed back, gently but firmly, every time. Some of them stopped trying, not because they stopped meaning it, because the effort of being refused started to feel like a statement about whether their perception had any value to you at all. In professional environments, it has played differently, but the cost has been the same. You don't advocate for yourself because advocacy requires believing the case you're making. You undercut your own contributions in rooms where the contributions actually matter. You describe your work with qualifications that function as preemptive apologies. And the people in those rooms who are reading signals, as people do, calibrate their perception of your value to match the perception you're broadcasting, which is always lower than the accurate one. Always. The suppression is its own kind of damage. When you try to simply accept a compliment, to perform the grace of it without meaning it, something in you registers the falseness immediately. You feel like a fraud not because you don't deserve the praise, but because you've accepted it without believing it, and now you're carrying a claim about yourself that doesn't feel supported. It creates a different dissonance, one where the external image and the internal experience are misaligned in the opposite direction, and that misalignment is somehow worse. So, the old real question, not am I broken, not is this normal. The real question this pattern forces you to face is this: if I cannot accept what other people accurately perceive about me, what does that say about the relationship between my self-knowledge and my reality? And more specifically, whose version of me am I protecting by refusing to let the accurate one indict it? That is the question. We're going to answer it now. Modesty is a social performance. That is the strategic downplaying of real achievement in order to manage other people's responses, to seem less threatening, more likable, appropriately humble. Modesty is conscious, it is chosen. And importantly, the person performing it does not actually believe the diminishment. They know they did something well. They're choosing to say otherwise for social reasons. What you do is not that. There is no strategy. There is no choice. The deflection happens because something in you genuinely cannot process the compliment as accurate information. You're not performing modesty. You're experiencing a collision between two incompatible data sets, and the response is to defer to the one you have more direct access to, your own internal experience of your limitations. You're not being modest. You're being epistemically honest about the only version of reality you currently have access to. The label modesty is wrong because it implies a performer who knows better. You are not a performer who knows better. You are someone whose access to certain truths about yourself has been systematically blocked, and the block was installed long before you had any say in the matter. What you call humility is actually the symptom of a restricted information set, and you cannot reason your way out of a data problem with better character. At some point in your development, and it was almost certainly early, the feedback you received from your prior environment and the internal experience you were having stopped matching. Maybe the praise came with conditions attached, invisible ones you couldn't quite decode. Maybe the approval felt contingent, arriving sometimes and not others, with no clear logic to predict it. Maybe the people whose perception of you mattered most were unreliable, either too generous in ways that felt untethered from anything real, or too withholding in ways that left you to fill the silence yourself. What the mind does in that situation is rational. It decides that external feedback is unreliable data. It learns to weight internal assessment more heavily than external signals, because internal assessment is the only information source that has been consistent. The self becomes the primary reference point, and external input, however positive, becomes noise to be filtered, not signal to be integrated. This is not a pathology. This is an adaptation. The mind protected you from building a self-concept on unstable ground. The problem is that the adaptation doesn't switch off when the environment changes. You carry it into contexts where the external feedback is actually accurate, where the people offering it are genuinely reliable, where the compliment is real, and you filter it out anyway. Because the filtering is no longer a decision. It's a habit of perception. When someone becomes genuinely frustrated that you won't accept their compliment, pay attention to what they're frustrated about. They are frustrated because your refusal to accept their perception feels like a rejection of their perception. And it is, in a sense. When you argue with their assessment of you, you're implicitly telling them that their ability to evaluate what they see is flawed. Some people find that intolerable, particularly people who have built their own sense of competence around their ability to read others correctly. The person who says just accept the compliment is not concerned with your self-image. They're concerned with the social disruption your refusal creates. The clean exchange, compliment given, compliment received, serves a social function, and your failure to complete the exchange breaks the ritual. Their frustration is about the broken ritual. It is not about you, and it is not guidance. It is a complaint, dressed up as advice. Because you do not simply accept external feedback as accurate, you have developed your own internal metric for quality. You know what good work actually feels like from the inside. You know when something is genuinely solid versus when it's technically acceptable, but built on shaky ground. You are not dependent on external validation to know the difference between your best and your average. You have access to that distinction from the inside, which most people do not. This is not a small thing. The people who have suppressed their internal critics most thoroughly, the ones who take every compliment cleanly and without dissonance, often cannot distinguish between their genuinely excellent work and their mediocre work because they have outsourced that judgment to others. They are efficient compliment receivers and poor self-evaluators. You are the opposite. The sensitivity that makes you reject inaccurate praise is the same sensitivity that makes you an unusually reliable judge of actual quality. The trait does not need to be eliminated. It needs to be redirected. When a compliment arrives and the collision happens, when external signal meets internal assessment and they don't match, you currently default to rejecting the external signal. This is the suppression. This is the version of the trait that has cost you things. But there is another option at that moment of collision, and it is not accept the compliment and pret to end. The dissonance doesn't exist. That's the performance version, and it doesn't work for you. The other option is to hold both, to allow the external signal to exist as data without requiring it to immediately resolve against your internal model. To say internally, this person is telling me they perceive X. I perceive something different. Both of those perceptions are real. I don't have to collapse them into one right now. This is not acceptance. This is not agreement. It is the willingness to let accurate information from a reliable source sit in your awareness long enough to have any effect at all. That willingness is the difference between the trait as a closed loop and the trait as a learning system. The closed loop diminishes you. The learning system compounds. Both contain the same underlying sensitivity. Only one of them lets anything in. Stop calling what you do being modest or having low self-esteem. These labels are wrong, and wrong labels produce wrong interventions. When you call it modesty, you think the fix is to feel worse about underplaying yourself. When you call it low self-esteem, you think the fix is to feel better about who you are. Neither intervention addresses the actual mechanism, which is a learned habit of treating external perception as unreliable data. The more accurate internal language. I am running an old filter on new information, not a character deficiency, not an emotional problem, a filter, a perceptual habit. It was installed in a specific context and has been applied universally ever since. When the collision happens, name it precisely. This is the filter. Not I can't accept compliments. Not I don't deserve this. This is the filter. That naming is not a comfort. It is a diagnostic. And diagnostics are how you begin to work with something instead of just against it. Not all environments are equally hostile to this trait. Some environments, highly social, low stakes, emotionally performative, require the clean compliment exchange and punish its absence. These are environments where the trait costs you more than it gives you, and where you should be least surprised when it creates friction. Others, environments defined by actual craft, by measurable output, by standards that exist, independent of anyone's feelings about them, are environments where the internal calibration you carry is genuinely useful, where your refusal to accept inaccurate praise functions as quality control, and where the people around you will, over time, come to trust your self-assessment, precisely because it isn't inflated. The audit question is not, how do I perform better in hostile environments? It is, am I spending enough time in environments where this trait functions as an asset rather than a liability? If the answer is no, the problem is not the trait. The problem is the ratio. The next time someone judges this pattern, the next time you hear just accept the compliment, or feel the social pressure of the broken ritual, you need a prepared internal response, because in that moment, you will not have time to reason through it. Here it is. They're responding to the disruption, not to me. My internal standard is not a social mistake. The first one releases their frustration from meaning anything about your worth. The second one reaffirms the value of what you're actually doing. You do not need to say this out loud. You do not need to explain yourself. You need this available internally so that the social pressure doesn't force you into a false choice between performing acceptance you don't mean or defending yourself in a way that will make the conversation worse. This is the mental posture of someone who has stopped treating this trait as a problem to be managed and started treating it as something that actually belongs to them. It does not look like confidence in the promotional sense. It does not look like ease. It does not involve having stopped feeling the collision when a compliment arrives. It involves having changed what you do with the collision. The person who has reached ownership looks at the collision and says internally, this is the part of me that refuses to lie about what I know. I'm not going to eliminate it. I'm going to put it in service of something real. They do not deflect because they've learned that the deflection denies the person offering genuine perception the basic dignity of being received. They do not perform acceptance because they know that performance is its own kind of lying. What they do is receive the information, hold it, and make a decision about how to respond. That is neither reflexive rejection nor reflexive agreement. The response they've landed on, the one that costs them nothing and damages nothing, and is completely honest, is the simplest thing. That means something to me. Not thank you delivered as a receipt, not a performance of gratitude, a statement that is literally true. The perception reached them, they registered it. It meant something. That is the full extent of what's being asked. And that much is always true, even when the dissonance is loudest. Because if it meant nothing, you wouldn't feel the collision at all. Here is the larger pattern underneath all of this. You have been measuring yourself against a standard of self-perception that assumes the most reliable information about you lives inside you. Duratel. That external perception is decorative, that what you know about your own limitations is more accurate than what others perceive about your strengths, because you have more data, more context, more access to the behind-the-scenes reality. That assumption is partially correct. You do have information that others don't, but the reverse is also true, in a way you have not fully reckoned with. They have information you don't. They see you without the static. They see the output without the noise of the process. They see the version of you that actually arrived, not the version you intended, not the version you're still trying to build, but the one that is already standing in front of them. And that version is real. It is not a projection or a charitable reading. It is what you actually produced, what you actually are in that moment, and you have been systematically refusing to let that data count. Here is what is actually true about you right now. You have a more accurate internal standard than most people you will encounter. You have been carrying a calibration instrument that most people don't have and wouldn't know how to use if they did. You have refused to inflate yourself, even when inflation would have been easy and socially rewarded. That is not nothing. That is actually a specific and unusual kind of integrity. And here is the final thing. This trait, this sensitivity, this internal standard, this refusal to agree with something that doesn't feel true, is not separate from who you are. It is not a flaw installed on top of an otherwise fine personality. It is the same part of you that cares about accuracy and everything else. The same part that knows when something is real versus when it's performed. The same part that has always been oriented, even against its own comfort, toward what is actually true. You were never going to be the person who takes compliments cleanly. That was never your shape. The question was only ever whether you would learn to receive the accurate ones, not perform their reception, not pretend the dissonance doesn't exist, but actually let them land, let them count, let them adjust the record. DC. Record has been kept wrong for a long time. Not because anyone lied to you, because you were the one doing the recording, and the instrument you were using was calibrated to catch your errors, not your accuracy. You were allowed to believe what they saw,